My phone lit up with Grandma Eleanor, just as loud party music shook the walls around me. I slipped into the hallway, away from the laughter and clinking glasses, thinking she was calling to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. When I answered, I didn't hear her usual soft, "Hi, sweetheart." I heard a sound that ripped through me, a choking sob. "Luke, it's your grandpa. He fell, he's unconscious." The world around me blurred. I could still hear Brenda's voice from the dining room, ordering people around like a general, and my dad's football game roaring in the background. But all I could picture was my grandfather, Arthur, dressed in his Sunday suit, probably with that new striped tie he'd been excited to wear, lying cold and alone somewhere on the porch of the old farmhouse in Hood River. I ran to my dad. "Grandpa fell. We need to go right now." He barely looked up from the TV. "Don't overreact, Luke. He'll be fine." "And Brenda?" She flashed her painted smile and said, "Oh, Luke, the turkey's getting cold. Don't be so dramatic." I didn't say a word. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door. The frigid Oregon night hit like a punch to the gut, snapping me out of the party's suffocating haze. As my headlights cut through the darkness on the highway, I knew I wasn't just racing to Hood River. I was hurtling toward the full, terrible truth of what my father and Brenda had done to the only two people in my life who represented pure, unconditional love. My name's Luke Anderson. I'm 27, a freelance graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. I rent a shoebox apartment. The windows rattle when buses pass. I love the city most days, the murals, the bridges, the way the rain makes everything look like it's thinking. But places aren't really about buildings. They're about memories, and mine are complicated. I grew up in Salem, about an hour south of Portland. My dad, Mark, was a mechanic, a big, booming man who was constantly telling incredible stories about the good old days. My mom, Sarah, had hair like corn silk and a laugh like wind chimes. To me, they were perfect until one day they weren't. When I was 12, I came down to find a note on the kitchen counter. "I need a different life." That was it. No goodbye. No explanation. After that, Dad changed. He didn't become cruel overnight. He became smaller, quieter. The big laugh shrank into a tight line. He sat in his chair with a beer and let the TV talk for him. I learned how to make dinner out of eggs and toast. I learned silence. What saved me were my grandparents in Hood River, Arthur and Eleanor Anderson. Their farmhouse stood at the edge of an orchard that smelled like sunlight and leaves. Grandpa Arthur was a retired history teacher who still dressed like he had class at 9. On holidays, he always wore a suit and adjusted his tie 3 times in the hallway mirror. "Dignity, Luke," he'd say. "Even when the world forgets its manners, you don't." His stories of the Roman legions were so vivid I could almost see their red standards snapping in the wind above our kitchen table. Grandma Eleanor was warm hands and flour on her apron. She measured love in slices of apple pie, flaky crust, a cinnamon bite, and always a bigger piece for me. Thanksgiving at their farmhouse meant laughter echoing in the warm, low-ceilinged rooms, steam blurring the windows, and a feeling of safety so deep it settled all the way down to your feet. Then Dad remarried. Her name was Brenda. Brenda came into our lives from back east. A woman with hair the color of a cheap trumpet, a cutting voice, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She wasn't just bossy. She was a commander. She picked the brand of coffee we should drink, corrected the way I folded napkins, and once told my dad to repark his own truck because it looked sloppy from the street. The thing that made me hate her was how she spoke about my grandparents. "They're just country folk," she'd say, coating the words in sugar. "Stuck in their little world. Bless their hearts." I learned to hear the insult hiding inside those 3 last words. It didn't take long for her to break the one thing that felt sacred, Thanksgiving in Hood River. She wouldn't even consider the 90-minute drive. "It's just too far," she'd whine. "And that little house, it always has that food smell. You know, baking." The way she wrinkled her nose on the word baking made it sound like a disease. So she insisted the holiday move to her dining room in Salem. Somehow my dad agreed. The first year they made the switch, Grandpa still wore his suit and smiled through it. Grandma brought her apple pie wrapped in a towel. Brenda thanked her, then set the pie off to the side and served store-bought pumpkin with a flourish, like a stage magician. That became the pattern. Fewer faces I loved, more people in stiff clothes laughing too loudly about boats and new countertops. The chandelier over Brenda's table looked less like a light and more like a trophy case for a life she wanted everyone to admire. This year, I told myself it would be fine. I drove down from Portland with a good bottle of Pinot Noir and white lilies for the table. But when I pulled up, my grandparents' old blue truck wasn't in the driveway. Inside, music crashed against the walls, and laughter bounced off the marble island. When I asked my dad where they were, he said, "They're busy," without taking his eyes off the game. That's when my chest went cold. They had never missed a Thanksgiving. Ever. Something was very, very wrong. I stood in the living room, the wine in my hand suddenly tasting like dust. "Busy," I repeated. I could still hear Grandma's voice from the week before, bright and excited. She told me Grandpa had a new striped tie laid out and that she was baking early so the crust had time to rest. Busy didn't make sense. Busy was a lie. Then my phone buzzed. When I reached the hospital's emergency bay, the ambulance was just backing in. They rolled Grandpa out on a stretcher. He was still and pale, bandaged, and dressed in his best suit. The striped tie was perfectly knotted against his white shirt. He had dressed for Thanksgiving. He had been waiting for an invitation that never came. Grandma stood under the fluorescent lights near the ER doors, wrapped in a thin shawl. When she saw me, she fell against me like she'd been holding herself up for hours by sheer will. "He kept waiting," she whispered into my coat. "He said maybe Mark would call." He kept going to the porch to look at the road. Hearing my father's name in her mouth like that hurt worse than the cold. We sat together in the plastic chairs of the waiting room, and she told me everything. Brenda had called the day before and said there wasn't room this year. Her parents and friends were coming, and my grandparents wouldn't fit in. My dad got on the phone and agreed. He told them not to bother coming, that they'd see them next week. But Grandpa put on his suit anyway. He kept watch at the window, then went out again, and that's where he fell, on the porch steps he had walked since he was a young man. When the doctor came out and said words like stable, mild concussion, and fractured rib, I felt my lungs fill all the way for the first time since the call. We were allowed in. Grandpa squeezed my fingers and said, "You came. I knew you would." I swallowed hard and told him, of course I did. Later, while Grandma dozed in the chair and the monitors hummed their simple music, her purse buzzed in my lap. A text from Mark, my father. "Mom, power bill's late. Need $300. Send it. Thanks." Something in me snapped. I opened the message thread. It was like a bad movie I couldn't stop watching. 4 years of requests, car payments, cruise deposits, Brenda's son's tuition, property taxes, credit cards, water bills, new tires, holiday gifts. The amounts stacked into a mountain. Thousands upon thousands. While living on a small pension, my grandparents had been bankrolling my father and his wife like a secret paycheck. They weren't just uninvited. They were being used. I showed Grandma the thread. "He's my son," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. I took her hand. "He's a grown man, Grandma," I said softly. "You've spent your whole life saving him from consequences until he forgot what they even are. This stops now." The next morning, we sat at her kitchen table. The same table where she'd taught me to peel apples in long ribbons, and changed passwords, canceled transfers, and closed the leak. Each click sounded like a lock turning on a door that should have been closed long ago. The storm hit a week later at Grandpa's follow-up appointment. Mark and Brenda arrived in coats that looked expensive and faces that looked tight. They were full of concern the way a commercial is full of authenticity. "Move, Luke," my father said when he saw me standing in the hall. "I'm here to see my father." "You're here," I said, "because the money stopped." Brenda blinked her wide eyes, her favorite trick. "Luke, honey, there's been a misunderstanding. We just wanted to manage the holiday seating and—" "You wanted their money," I said, "but not them. You left him waiting in the cold in his best suit so your friends wouldn't have to sit next to old people who smell like baking." The color rose in my father's face. "Don't talk to me like that, boy." The exam room door opened, and Grandma Eleanor stepped into the doorway. Small, steady, and sharp with quiet resolve. "Mark," she said very clearly, as if pronouncing a lesson, "go home. I don't want to see you." I had never seen my father at a loss. He stood there like a man who'd been told his favorite chair was gone. Brenda started to speak. Something about respect and family. But Grandma turned her eyes to her, and Brenda shut her mouth. They left because there was nowhere in that hallway for their kind of power to stand. When I went back inside, Grandpa Arthur was buttoning his shirt with slow, careful fingers. He met my eyes, the same calm, patient look he used to give his students, and said, "You did good, Luke." That sentence was a bridge back to the boy who had learned to tie a tie in the mirror of that old farmhouse. Across it, I understood something simple. Sometimes protecting your family means letting go of people who only show up to take. After the confrontation, the quiet in my grandparents' house felt different. It wasn't the peaceful kind I remembered. It was the kind that follows a storm, when everything is still standing but nothing feels quite the same. I stayed. I fixed the loose porch board where Grandpa had slipped. I changed light bulbs, sharpened knives, and hauled out a broken chair no one had sat in since before I was born. In the mornings we drank coffee and watched fog move through the trees. The fog rolled low across the orchard like it was trying to remember where the ground ended and the sky began. Some mornings, the world looked so quiet I could almost believe it was starting over. I fixed the loose shutters, oiled the hinges, replaced a pane of cracked glass in the kitchen window. Every repair felt like an apology to the house itself. For all the years it had waited for joy to come back. Grandma's laughter slowly returned, light and uncertain at first, like a song she'd forgotten the words to. Grandpa told shorter stories, but his punchlines still landed. Grandma hummed while she baked, and every so often she wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron, like someone finally letting herself grieve what she had been pretending wasn't happening. With the house steady again, my own life came into focus. I thought about my apartment in Portland, how I trained myself to fall asleep to the drone of buses and the glow of screens. I thought about the sleek websites I designed for companies whose owners I never met. I thought about being 12 and reading my mother's note, being 27 and watching my father choose a football game over his own father. I asked myself the question that had been nibbling at me for weeks. Who am I if I let them define family? The answer was simple. I am not that person. So I ended my lease. I packed my books and my plants and my one decent saucepan. I moved into a small white cottage 10 minutes from the farmhouse, with peeling paint and a fence that leaned like it listened too closely. Life became quiet, measured in cups of coffee on my new porch and the sound of gravel under my tires as I drove the short distance to my grandparents' house. I kept my freelance design clients in Portland, working from a small desk by a window that overlooked a patch of wildflowers. The city felt a million miles away. My afternoons were spent at the farmhouse. I wasn't just visiting. I was present. I helped Grandpa retrain the roses that had grown wild along the fence. I sat with him on the porch, reading while he dozed, the history of Rome forgotten for an afternoon. I learned to bake with Grandma, or rather, to peel apples and measure flour while she did the real magic. The kitchen, which had been the source of so much pain, became a sanctuary again. My father called, of course. The first time, his voice was tight with an anger that couldn't hide the panic. "What do you think you're doing, Luke? You've poisoned them against me." "I'm just here, Dad," I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. "They're fine. They're safe." "We're in trouble," he said, the mask slipping. "Brenda's car." "I can't help you with that, Dad," I said. "And they can't either. It's over." I hung up and felt not triumph but a deep, aching relief. The second time he called, a month later, I didn't answer. Grandma saw me look at the screen and simply reached over and put her hand on mine. The phone rang until it stopped. We heard through a distant cousin that Mark and Brenda had to sell the house. They moved into a condo closer to her family. Their world, built on taking, had finally shrunk to a size they could actually afford. Spring arrived. The orchards burst into a riot of white and pink blossoms. One Saturday, I was helping Grandpa fix the very porch step he had fallen on. It was solid now, secure under our feet. "You know," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "your mother used to love these blossoms." It was the first time he'd mentioned her in years. I braced myself, but he just smiled. A small, sad smile. "She was a lot like you, always running. I'm just glad you found a place to stop." I looked out at the trees, at the old white farmhouse, at my small cottage just down the road. He was right. I wasn't running anymore. That night, we had dinner at the kitchen table. Grandma had made a simple roast chicken. There was no suit, no striped tie, just the three of us. The phone didn't ring. No one was waiting by the door. It wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. It was just Tuesday. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving and wonder if my father ever realized what he lost that day. Maybe he still tells himself he was right, that old people complained too much, that I took sides. But I don't need his version anymore. What I have is real. Every quiet breakfast, every apple pie cooling on the counter, every soft moment of peace. They're the kind of inheritance no one can steal. When I look out at the orchard, I know exactly who I am and where I belong. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.